Hi, everyone. It's Deborah Hamilton. And today we're going to talk to Dr. Janet Hoy Gerlach, who is a licensed social worker and the mover and shaker behind Ask About the Pet at the Open Door Pet Collective. It was such an interesting conversation about how to find out about the pets of people who you are assisting either in crisis, health crisis, housing crisis, just life crisis. Asking about the pet is one of the best ways to create empathy and compassion, as well as opening up to tell you the information you need to know. So let's hear what Janet has to say.
Hi, I'm Deborah Hamilton. Welcome to my podcast, Why Do Pets Matter? 10 years ago, with my iPhone and a script, I recorded the first episode of the Ultimate Pet Resolution Summit, which chatted with experts about conflicts over animals. Our conversations were intimate, honest, and illustrated how disagreements over animals occur and how those disagreements can reshape people's lives and relationships. In November 2019, I started Why Do Pets Matter, a new podcast that continued these informative discussions. I'm so excited to have you here with me, continuing my exploration into a more meaningful conversation about why pets matter to all of us. My guests and I will share ideas, stories, and experiences straight from the heart, unscripted and holistic. From the bravest moments to the most brokenhearted, we will explore how to resolve disagreements over animals differently. One thing I know for sure is I want to have more meaningful conversations that will help all of us unlock that deeply felt human-animal bond that drives the emotions of conflict.
Hi, everyone. Deborah Hamilton. I'm so glad you're here again for the Why Do Pets Matter podcast. Today, we're talking to Dr. Janet Hoy Gerlach. She is a licensed social worker, but she's also the licensed social worker for the Open Door Veterinarian Collective, which, if you've listened to a prior podcast, was also what Amy Saint Arnaud was part of as well. They have started this wonderful program where people can have access to care for their pets. And so, Janet, I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. So I'm excited to be here.
So Janet and I have been friends for a number of years. I think, taught a class or two for her in conflicts over animals. So it was wonderful. And we've worked together. So I want to have full disclosure that we are really compatriots in this world. So I am having her here because she has this wonderful in service to animals. But before we get into that, because I'm so excited to talk to her about what she's doing now, Janet, we ask every guest one question, and that is, why do pets matter to you?
Mm. Pets matter to me because they are incredibly wonderful companions and family members and bring such joy to my day-to-day life. And I am so grateful to be able to share my life with um, many wonderful animals. I wish that they had longer lifespans that were more matched to mine. You know, they say with great love can come great grief, and that is absolutely true. But for me, it is worth it tenfold just to be able to be with them and have uh, all the benefits that their companionship offers.
I love it. I love it. And before you started with Open Door, you were actually teaching, you were one of the pioneers in teaching veterinary social work. Would that be fair?
Uh, I taught more broadly, actually, human animal interaction, health and wellness from a social work perspective. So, certainly that encompasses veterinary social work, which is the practice specialty in social work for um, kind of the intersection of human animal relationships and the human needs that emerge from that. But I also more broadly taught uh, how to work with folks who have animals across social work populations, practice settings with, I believe the most recent demographics I've looked at, about 71% of US households are reporting at least one pet, and over 90% of these are saying their pet is a family member. And so it's not a little niche, and it's not any kind of specialty, working with somebody with a pet. It really is the majority of people that or who social workers are interacting with across, the practice settings and populations. So really raising, competence. I can't tell you, when folks will we'll be talking and they'll find out, my area of focus being, human animal relationships and social work. I've gotten comments like, oh, that's great, Janet, but I'm not an animal person, so that's not something I need to get any training with in my practice. And it's really not about being an animal person. Certainly that helps, but it's about being a competent social worker or a competent healthcare provider, mental health care provider, and being able to start where your client or patient is at and bring in their relationships, their supports as they understand and um value them. And that's something we do for spirituality, religion, hobbies that support well-being. We really try to bring in people's natural supports, and our relationships with animals have just historically been really underlooked.
Yeah, or overlooked by people because they just didn't think, well, I have so much to check off in the check boxes.
Mm,
I can't really ask about the pet. And yet we saw, I mean, in vivid detail, Hurricane Katrina, where people wouldn't leave their pets behind and died with their pets. And I think that social work and veterinary social work, maybe as a off branch, came out of those recognitions that people live with and for their pets as much as their pets live with and for their people. So in Open Door, you and Amy have created such a wonderful program. Please do a short overview of what Open Door is before we go into what your specific magnificence is in Open Door.
oh, thank you, Deborah. What you were saying really struck me. I will answer your question. I just want to um, add, I mean, what you said about Katrina, people do die for their pet. People were found deceased with their pets who had refused to evacuate. And conversely, and this was kind of the two by four that hit me a few decades back, and I open a lot of talks I do with this. I was doing full-time crisis work and I was doing suicide risk assessments, and one of the questions we're trained to ask as part of the risk assessment, it's not my question, the question is, what's stopped you up until now from acting on your suicidal thoughts, your plan? And I got the kinds of responses I've been trained to listen for. We call these protective factors, but things like I can't leave my children, or I can't hurt my parents, my family like that. Can't do that to my friends. It's against my faith, my religion beliefs. I believe it's wrong. Um, However, on a regular basis, were folks who were saying, I can't leave my pet. And two things about that hit me as a quote unquote animal person. I got it. I got how that bond with your animal could be powerful enough to kind of keep you anchored to, staying alive for them. As a mental health provider, as a social worker, it hit me that nowhere in my training, my education, my supervision, our agency forms, none of those places was there any mention of pets at all. And yet, on a regular basis, people were saying to me, and, as a young clinician, relying heavily on supervision, consultation, of course, I went to my team and they were like, oh, yeah, people say that regularly, pets. And I was like,
And
but
nobody had the light bulb you had.
yeah, well, why don't we, proactively ask about that, or why isn't it in our forms? And it was kind of like, yeah, that would be good. Um, but it wasn't happening. And this by no means is my light bulb per se. When I did a bit of digging, the first social work case study in peer-reviewed literature I found that really called for asking about pets and
Recognition of
being,
the importance, right?
yeah, was in 1975.
Oh,
So half a century ago was the first time this was really raised as a need. It was a very sad story of a woman who went into a nursing home for rehab after a fall. Her dog was in the apartment by herself and then went into the Humane Society or animal shelter, but they were requiring board. And when she ran out of money, uh, the social worker tried all sorts of resources, but couldn't find any, fund or other accommodation for her dog. And the dog was euthanized. And the woman stopped eating and drinking and died essentially of adult failure to thrive shortly thereafter. The social worker, her name is Gerda Bakalis, concluded by saying every social worker should, have resources so that this never happens, and that we should be inclusive. She's in her 90s, she's still alive. I had the pleasure of talking with her, and she was both delighted that her case study is being
going
used,
forward,
and also, like, okay, it's been half a century, like like I hope we can,
get with the
get this
program.
to be the default. Again, we have the majority of folks, households in this country, with pets, and most of them saying that this is their family member. We need to be routinely inclusive. And that takes me to the Ask About Pets initiative. And I want to do a big shout out to Maddie's Fund, because without them, it wouldn't be possible. They have funded this, and it's a 3-year grant. So the first year is about raising awareness and giving people tools. So because of Maddie's, or thanks to Maddie is the hashtag that's frequently used goes, we've been able to do free webinars, and we partnered with the International Association of Vet Social Work, and they've provided social work continuing education credit for a number of these, and essentially, helped raise awareness of what we've been talking about, the importance of asking about pets proactively, and then helping to support that relationship through, again, staying in our lane. We're, as human service providers, social work, but also uh primary care doctors and psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors, nurses, the gamut of human service folk. We're not animal behaviorists, trainers, veterinarians, and this does not require that. It's about being responsive to your client, to your patient, uh, helping again recognize, when they have a pet, that this is frequently a very important relationship for them, and then building on that as a strength and a resource in their well-being, and helping them connect to supports. And the three questions that I've identified from talking to organizations that are asking about pets in some capacity, very straightforward. First question, do you have pets? And if so, tell me, about them. Second question, are your pets helpful for you? If so, how? And third question, any worries about your pets and who can be helpful?
Those are three of the most important questions to ask.
And again, like, not my questions per se, but just from countless conversations with providers who ask themselves, may not be in their agency forms. Again, it's not typically, this is not something that is our these questions are
It's in your
not.
clinical outline to ask someone, and yet you've created this little piece.
And it can fit very again from conversations, of where some of it varies based on, the kind of work you're doing, the kind of human service provision, but some of the places these questions tend to fit and flow, family, because as I mentioned, folks identifying their pets as family, social support, who are your supportive relationship folks, including your pets, and then who do you live with is another. And depending on, the practice setting, there may be another spot that makes more sense. I think being flexible and figuring out what works best. And I also recognize, the assessments, the admissions, these are sometimes like 15-page documents. So every question, there's so many important questions, and I feel that. I feel that at a visceral level, having been a clinician for many years. And I'm sometimes asked, well, what if it was just one question? Like, what would you pick? And again, I wouldn't. I ask folks, I ask clinicians that just ask, that don't have the power to change their forms, but they ask. And then of course there's some organizations that have changed their forms. And the question that repeatedly has come up is, any worries about pets? And if so, who can be helpful? And that tends to elicit, if you have pets, if they're like, I don't have any pets, you have that. If they're like, no, everything's good with my pets, they have pets.
Yeah.
So, and of course, the who can be helpful kind of gets at, who in that person's. Sometimes they're like, oh, I don't know, really nobody. But if there's, oh, my neighbor, my adult child, my, friend, whoever, that tends to elicit that. And so that seems to be the question that folks report, gives the most bang for your buck, if you really have to just distill it to one question with a text box. And including it in the form is critical. Asking as a provider, of course, is, if it can be in a form and
Should
not
be
be asked.
standard, right?
Yeah, but if we put it in a form, in a paper, that creates infrastructure. That lifts it off the backs of the providers to remember, and so many things to remember. And that moves it to sort of an institutionalized level. So it's no longer on individual provider. It's now the standard, as you just said. That's kind of the ultimate. And then that enables, the identification of the relationship with the animal and all the benefits, biological, psychological, social, emotional. There's, peer-reviewed research literature on each of those, and the risks. Every relationship is a mix. And typically, many folks will say, the benefits outweigh the stressors, but the stressors can be significant, financial, behavioral, barriers to accessing resources. If a person doesn't have care for their pet, they may delay needed medical care. They may, you know, opt to not be in a safe housing situation because they don't have care for their pets. We talked about, not evacuating. And it's also not trauma informed. We're getting so much better at trauma informed care, which is, being proactively aware of how to reduce, additional traumatization, re-traumatization. When we ignore, or maybe that's not the right word, because I don't believe it's intent there. It's not
I
a
just think it's
proactive intent.
overlooked.
It's, yeah,
There's
it's
so
overload.
many questions on those
Yeah.
15 pages. It's just an overlook.
Yeah. And so when we're not attending to this significant relationship in people's lives, for some people the most significant relationship, um that's kind of systematically, trying to think of the right word. I mean, it can result in additional harm and trauma if there's forced separation.
Unintentional.
Yeah,
Unintentional.
unintentional, but if they are, the worst case scenario is Miss Bacalle's study with Lacey, the dog,
Well, I
pseudonym.
can tell you that happened during COVID. There was a woman who didn't have COVID, but broke her femur, and her 9-year-old Afghan was being taken out of the house by animal care and control while she was being taken to the hospital because she broke her hip, right? Because people break their hips.
Sure.
And she said, "What are you doing with my dog?" And they said, "Well, we're taking it to animal care and control. It'll be here when you get out of the hospital." So she believed them. And they were calling her on her phone, but she was in the hospital and then she was in rehab and she didn't know she had to pick up. And so the dog was held for the term, and then given to a shelter and then adopted. And she couldn't get it back. And she's like, "Wait a minute, you told me he'd be here when I got
Oh my
out."
gosh.
And I think that what you're doing is so important because most of the time, going to get care, rehabilitating from that care, and continuing to improve after the initial, discovery of the care necessary, the care given, and then recovery and next steps are
Hmm.
usually supported by the pets. I mean, sometimes there's a trip fall hazard. I have a friend now whose little English Cocker
Yeah.
Spaniel's uh, a beautiful kennel right now because she just had back surgery and the trip and fall risk is real. And
Yes.
so that's fine, but she can't wait to get the dog back and she has the
Yes.
funds to do that. But if you didn't have the funds to do that, then that's where you all come in to ask the questions, to find out if there's resources or to find a way to minimize the risk.
Yes. And resources. That reminds me, uh, I, I wanted to share it. Pet Help Finder is a database, and there's three subcategories that are searchable. There's affordable vet care, pet food and supplies, and then crisis fostering, boarding, that type of thing for situations where a person temporarily, for whatever reason, is unable to
Care for
care for
their
their pet.
pet long term, short term, right? Either while they're
Yes.
going into the hospital and then maybe going to rehab. So that might be anywhere from 2 to 6 to 8 weeks,
Yes.
right?
And it's searchable by zip code, so it can get pretty locally specific, but it also includes, regional and even national resources that a person could apply for. And
And we'll get those show notes from Janet. We'll get those links from Janet and put them in the show notes, guys. So if you didn't catch the names, we will have them in the show notes afterward because it's really an important piece of information to know where to go to help your mother, your
yes,
sister, your neighbor, and their
yes,
pets because everybody wants to step in and help. But if somebody's in rehab for 4, 6, 8, 10 weeks, that's a long time to have your neighbor taking care of your dog, maybe alone in the house, but coming in to let it out and feed it. There's got to be some stimulation. So you really do have to make a little bit of a plan.
yes. And that is we have if you go to it's www.pethelpfinder.org, and again we'll have that available for
Perfect.
folks. And there's also an email on that site. So this is something that we share and walk through with providers, but anybody can use it. We partner with 211, which is United Way's search database, locally. There's the national 211, and then I think there's 40 some regional, and then there's many local. Those are staffed with 24/7 folks you can call or you can search. At this point, we have it searchable, and you can email for help if you don't find what you need.
And that's at one open door, right?
Yeah, Open
Yeah.
Door, we operate the www.pethelpfinder.org. And that's really important because we can ask about pets, but if I have had folks say, so great, like we ask, then what? Who are we going to call?
Yeah.
Ghostbusters. I literally had somebody ask me, I was like, that's great. No,
But you
actually,
have to be of a certain
fortunately,
age to understand that too.
yes, I'm like, been there, 5 o'clock on a Friday, and I have somebody with a pet back, in my case management days,
And what do
and
you
they
do?
just
I
lost
mean,
their housing, and I'm like, I have no idea what to do with, with this. But
and it's huge in
fortunately,
domestic violence as well that they're just discovering that having pet care availability
yes.
gives people in a domestic violence as well as in a health crisis find the courage to leave or get the health care they need because they don't want to risk losing their pet. And a
Yeah.
lot of them do lose their pets if everybody doesn't know what it is that Open Door is putting together as a guide, because the One Health really includes everyone in your family. And as you said, what was it, like 80% of people consider their
Uh,
family members?
yeah, of the 71% households in the
7%.
United States, like over 90% of those are reporting or reported that their pet was a family member.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And so, how do we plan for our children? Not that, there are some people who have a lot of pushback from they're not children, but they are living beings who need care. And
dependent.
sometimes they're the
They're
reason I get up in the morning.
yes, they're definitely our dependents, and for many folks, they're a powerful, motivator to um
To mobility, to getting up in the morning, to eating. I
yes.
mean, I think there were also studies, weren't there? Probably part of what spurred you to do this. They had a lot of studies. Meals on Wheels were saying that people were um, taking some of the food that was delivered for them for Meals on Wheels and giving it to their pets because they didn't have enough money to feed their pets, so they shared their meal. And I think Meals on Wheels now also is coordinating with other pet food
Yeah.
providers to put that in the basket. Do you have a pet? Yes. Oh, okay. Well, we have a bag of chow for you, or whatever it is that they're bringing along, so that people can maintain their ability to keep a pet. And of course, I'd love to ask your thoughts about when people say, well, if they can't afford to keep a pet, they shouldn't have a pet.
Most of us are a couple paychecks away from financial crisis. And
So well put.
that means it could be any of us with pets who suddenly are struggling to afford them. And to make that kind of a sweeping statement really is not
Helpful.
helpful, or I mean it would eliminate many of us
Yeah, and compassion. Yeah,
that are generally wonderful pet guardians or owners, whatever term we want to use. And so often, and that's a lot of what Pet Help Finder provides, is those supports to get us through temporary crises. And that pet is in a, for pets who are in loving homes, it is a much better outcome for the pet to
and
have
the
their
people.
human supported through
Yeah,
hardship, and so they can stay in that home, or with that human, those, that human family, whatnot, as opposed to the stress of being surrendered in, to a shelter environment where, many shelters are at or over capacity. um Not all, like my animals, I really don't have, my animals are older, they're mixed breed, they're not like highly adoptable, and when they're gonna, they would be competing against puppies and kittens, and they're all older adults, and have some issues, and I adore them and work with their issues. But yeah, if they were in a animal shelter right now, I don't know that they would fare well in terms of adoptability. And then, for folks who are unhoused and on, let's say, living on the street, for example, with an animal, if we look at, the animal welfare literature and the five freedoms and enrichment and so forth, being with their human all day every day, being outside with, um all sorts of environmental enrichment, arguably, like, I'm not an animal expert, so big old disclaimer there, but I think if you reached out to some, that would be, there'd be some interesting conversation about what quality of life could look like for a dog, quote unquote, living on the street with their human. And there's also research. My Dog is My Home is a national nonprofit, but kind of similar to Meals on Wheels, like you were talking about. My Dog Eats First was one of the studies or papers. The animal's well-being is the priority, so the food, whatever resources the person gets, goes to their
to feed the
animal.
animal. Yeah,
And so, if it's, I mean, it's hard to take the perspective of another species, but I'm imagining, and again, we could have conversations with people who have the expertise in this, but being with your human, like, most of the time, and being outside, I imagine that would have some serious enrichment and benefits, and more kind of FaceTime with their human than, animals who live in houses with their humans, who many of us are, working, and, go out of the house, and animals are home, and very safe, maybe comfortable environments, but with not as much time with their humans. And as social mammals,
they
that's
really do so
something to
much better.
consider.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
they
so
do
I
so much.
guess, well, like, saying if you can't afford them, you shouldn't have them, oversimplifies. Uh, I
The benefits to the dog, the cat, the bird, the horse, whatever, and the human, because there is a mutual beneficial
yes,
give and take in those relationships that shouldn't just be broken down to can you afford it? Because sometimes what you may not be able to afford and may need assistance actually keeps you mentally grounded. Like you said, in those early days when you took the suicide hotline calls, the reason they didn't commit suicide is because they have the dog. Well, if they'd given up the dog because they'd lost their job, they couldn't, then what's going to ground them? And I would argue, and I think anyone who's owned a pet and loved a pet, that if we lose our pets, we, like the woman who stopped eating, we ultimately say, well, then there's really nothing here to keep me. And I think that's what you're working toward. You're working toward having everyone recognize, ask them about their pets. And that does two things. One is you know what grounding they have at home. And as we all know who own pets, if you talk about your pet, you're an instant friend.
Yes, I just did a training with home care staff, and one of the things that came up was, well, what if, the pet has to be closed up because, they're not,
People
used to
friendly.
being around new people, and or they get stressed or aggressive or whatnot. And so, like, how do I, make friends with their pet? And actually, that's not necessary. What you said, I think, is the magic. Like, oh, I hear Fido in the background. He's got a good set of healthy lungs on him. He's got a lot to say today. How is he doing? That's talking with the person about their, they have the relationship with the, it's not necessarily, I mean, if, you know,
I mean, it helps if the dog likes you or the cat likes you, but
yeah,
some
but
of them
they,
don't, and that's okay, just as long as you recognize how important they are and
yes,
carry on that wonderful generic conversation. Generic's probably not the right word, but that compassionate and empathetic conversation of,
yes,
so how
yeah,
is
just,
Fluffy? Sounds like he's having a very wild and crazy day today, or whatever,
yes.
because he's behind the door, whatever.
Yeah, he's got, he looks out for you. He's got lots to say. We don't have, if it's better, to have and some organizations even have policy like the animal needs to be,
Right.
contained because,
the,
strange
the
sounds,
social
strange
worker might be
smells.
afraid. That was just going through my head. So I always want to take the time and respect people who don't want animals in their lives, and they exist, and they aren't bad people. They just, well, they just like a clean house. First of all, I'm pretty sure that is, and I would like a clean house too. And I always say, yes, I know I would like a clean house, but there are people who have had pets and just can't live with that heartbreak again of losing them, so they don't get another one. Or they've never had pets and there's really no driving force, or they feel like you said with the homeless person, is it better to own a pet, go to work 9 to 5, and see the pet first thing in the morning and then in the afternoon? Some people say that's not really fair to a dog or a cat, and I don't have time, so I'm not going to get them. And these are all legitimate reasons to get a dog or not to get a dog. And I think in your work, it's just recognizing that whatever they say is an open door to a bigger conversation.
Oh, and I love how that ties into to open door. You'd asked me to explain what open door is, and I completely uh
Oh, that's fine.
went
I'd
off
love to.
into
Yeah.
another direction. But Open Door is a national nonprofit with the overarching mission of, increasing the well-being of animals and their people through supporting access to veterinary care and other needed supports that help keep people and their animals together, help the animals to stay healthy. So access to care is, if I had to make it into a snippet, it's reduce the barriers, increase the access. And mainly how we approach that is, I guess the term technical assistance, but training, resources, the pet help finder, kind of being our crown jewel of that. But
Yeah,
uh
pulling all the information together so that you're giving people the opportunity to find affordable health care for their pets, not because they don't want to get health care for their pets, but rather, as you said, we're all 1 or 2 or 3 paychecks from, you know, disaster. So what can we do proactively to understand how to find these situations, these opportunities to help us help our pets?
yes, yeah. And helping our pets helps
Ah,
us typically, and helping us helps our pets. That's the one health. And of course the
that's
broader
the
the,
circle.
Yeah, and then of course healthy communities and environments help everybody, people, pets, all of the above. So really building on those connections can amplify well-being across those areas very powerfully.
So, Janet, if somebody wanted to learn more about Open Door, I know there's a link that we're going to put in the show notes, but what would they do to either get in touch with Open Door generally or maybe in touch with you because they want to ask you a few questions?
I will give you my email. They can certainly reach out to me directly by email. And again, if there's questions about resources, there's an email specifically for Pet Help Finder on the Pet Help Finder site that folks can email. And then I encourage folks to explore our webpage. We have a number of free trainings. We have the social work pet help hub, which is a deeper dive into to resources supporting folks with animals, free trainings for emotional support animal verification. That's a whole other area where I think good resource information is needed. If you go online and Google emotional support animal, you're going to find a bunch of predatory for profit sites that sell letters that often use questionable kind of processes in verifying a person's eligibility for an emotional support animal. It is straightforward, and the so we have three free trainings on for healthcare mental health care providers, but anybody can watch them if they want to learn more and maybe use that information in a conversation with their own health or mental health care provider. So yeah, there's for veterinary folks, the whole financial piece and working with folks around payment and a range of payment plans that
One
not
of the
all
most
of which,
important questions.
yeah, not, the hard credit check can be a barrier. And fortunately, there's some great payment plan resources out there that the clinics, the practices don't have to manage. And I'm sure Amy talked with you about those.
Yep.
That it's that will give full payment, so it's not, it's sustainable, it's profitable, and I think it helps reduce that compassion fatigue and moral injury that comes with the economic conflict that can arise in veterinary care when a person can't afford payment up front and for whatever reason can't qualify for a payment plan that requires a hard credit check, and then um that limits their ability to get the needed care for their
Yeah.
animals.
And so
And
they avoid getting care and then
yeah,
things
or
exacerbate. Yep.
there can be confrontation with the veterinary staff. And I have no doubt nobody goes into veterinary services to deny people care for their pets. They're trained to help the pet, and they have wonderful expertise in that. And to not be able to use that because of economic barriers, I think is incredibly difficult. The wear and tear on the staff emotionally. Um, and so we have a lot of information around, again, sustainable payment. So not, giving the services away, getting, fully reimbursed for them, but in ways that, more people are eligible for. So it reduces that economic conflict that I think can be a real hardship for both the staff and the clients. And of course, not good for the animal patients.
So,
So,
Open Door Vet Collective is just this repository of great information that helps you live your fullest life with your pet, given the situation you find yourself in as well, because I'm sure there's a donation arm there as well for when you're flush and you can help somebody else. I love the vet practices that have, I mean, we had Robert Parkinson from My Balto, who's creating a resource for people to, and veterinary practices to help those who can't pay. But Open Door Veterinary Collective is one that has such a vast range of information for the pet owner who may be facing a crisis they've never had to face before. And you've sort of done all the legwork to help them find what next steps are available to help them keep their pets.
Yes, I've done legwork around the human healthcare and social services. I'm definitely part of a team, though. Like Pet Health
Oh, yeah.
Finder was well developed before I was even brought on board, as well as, partnerships that have been created
But
with.
it's great. It's a partnership and not a competition. Like I have more information about this than you do, and so I'm going to keep it because, quite
No,
frankly,
yes,
helping people keep their pets in their lives
yes.
can
Open Doors
sometimes,
definitely were partner people.
yep.
So we, elevating local resources whenever possible, more being behind the scenes, behind the curtain is.
But elevating our educational level to know that there's something out there. So, Jen, I am so glad that we had this time to talk. I'm sure I'm going to have you back many times because so much is changing now. And Open Door
Mhm.
is doing such wonderful work, especially the work you're doing with, Ask About the Pet. It really it starts like it's like asking about your grandkids, right? Ask about the cat pet, ask about the grandkids, and everybody just pulls out their wallet and says, "Here, can I show you the pictures?" And talks ad infinitum, sometimes more than we want. But it creates that connection, that connectivity that will get you then more information so that you can help the person and or the pet in a better way.
Yes, that's a whole other conversation because you're absolutely spot on, right? It's a wonderful way for engagement and to build trust and rapport. And there are studies that show it helps communication between health and mental health care providers and people. When we ask about what's important to them, of course,
Yeah.
but for folks,
Those
when
three
it's their pet,
questions, right? Do you
yep.
have a pet? How are they doing? And are the pets helpful to you? I thought that was the best question
Mm,
because that makes you think about, well, are they helpful to me? I mean, they make me walk them, they make me feed them. Is that helpful? Well, wait a minute. At night, when they put their head, I have to tell you, and everyone at the last few minutes, I had my son's cat for about 6 months, and she's been gone since May. And
mm,
I miss that purring because I'd never had it before. I've had dogs
mm.
and I've had birds. And I have bird dogs, so that was never a good mix, but that digress. I've had turtles and I've had lizards and I've had guinea pigs and no cats. And this cat was just the purring,
Yeah.
unless you've had a cat, which I think I saw one walk a little bit by us here.
Yes, I
Uh,
live with three
the,
and they are,
the
yeah,
purring
magical.
just resets your whole engine. My husband would say to me, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm up with Jane." And he'd say, "But you've been there for 45 minutes." I said, "Really? I thought it was like 5 minutes."
Mm,
It
yes,
just, it's just so great. So until next time, everyone, I am so grateful, Janet, that you spent this time with us. We're going to do this again probably in the new year because I want to make sure I keep up with Open Door Vet
mhm,
Collective. I want to make sure I keep up with them and also bring them to everyone who's listening to the podcast because one never knows when one needs to use the resources. So check it out. Thank you so much, Janet, for
thank
being
you.
here. It's been great. And until next time, everyone, remember to like us, to share us, to give us 5 stars so other people can find us and hear all about the great information that Janet just shared. And until next time, please kiss your cat, your dog, your bird, your horse, your lizard, your snake, your turtle, whatever you have, because they all are, um, and they all matter to us. Thanks.